Andrea never had it easy in her household. From the moment she was old enough to hold silverware safely, she was taught domestic skills. By the time she was 12, she could set the table, cook, clear the dishes, and put them to wash by herself. Her two older brothers? They could barely wash their own plates. It was expected, though. This was her role in the household. They needed to focus on high school so they could graduate and pursue their dream careers. Andrea went to school as well, but education was never going to be her priority. She was in high school because the law said it was required. She'd never do anything beyond that. Once she had kids, her role would be to stay home with them. This was what was expected of her. It was not, however, what Andrea expected of herself. She immersed herself in physics and mathematics, spending her free time reading about engineering marvels and watching documentaries. She knew what she wanted to be. The problem was, no one else wanted it for her. While she continued being taught how to maintain a house, her older brothers headed off to college. Her parents gave them their full support. Their education was paid for, their accommodation was taken care of, their books were bought, and their living expenses were covered. Andrea knew she could only dream of such support when she tried to pursue the career of her choosing. In her senior year of high school, Andrea focused on preparing to leave home. She'd never discussed college with her parents. It never seemed like a topic of interest with her. She decided to make plans with the assumption of zero support from her parents. She soon found her belief to be true when it became clear to her that her parents expected her to stay with them instead of leaving for college. Starting with working odd jobs to earn enough to settle down in college accommodation, to learning how to apply to colleges by herself, Andrea worked her way from the ground up. Her friends' parents supported her, driving her where she needed to be, sorting through loan options, and helping her decide on colleges. It all paid off when the acceptance letter arrived. Andrea was offered a scholarship to her first-choice college to study civil engineering, just as she had always dreamed of. Preparing for college without her parents finding out was tough. She had to buy books, sort through accommodation, and figure out her finances. Andrea was used to struggling, though, and 2 days before her semester was due to start, her bags were packed and her plans had been made. She informed her parents of her plans to leave, to massive backlash that she was obviously prepared for, and set off, settling down miles away from anywhere her parents could find her. Andrea thrived in college. One thing her parents had definitely prepared her for was living independently, despite it being for different reasons. Andrea graduated with honors, fell in love, got married, and moved in with her husband, and most importantly, worked in her dream job as a civil engineer. Andrea was living the life she had always hoped for. The only thing missing was her family. She had to admit she missed them. Regardless of their lack of support for what she truly wanted to do, they were still her blood. They never made an attempt to reach out to her, and she didn't know if she was being entitled by hoping that one day they would. She had left them after all. Wasn't it her responsibility to make an effort to reconcile? At the same time, it was their fault she had to leave. They had refused to support her in the pursuit of her dreams. Maybe she was hoping they would finally come around and see that she did the right thing by following her passion. She almost laughed at the thought. It had been 7 years since she left home. The only updates she got of their lives were through Facebook. Her oldest brother, Gray, had 3 kids. Her second brother, David, was expecting his first. They were both working as investment bankers and earned good money. Andrea smiled as she thought about them. Her parents must be proud of them. Would they be proud of her if they knew how she was doing? A nice apartment in the middle of the city, a brilliant, loving husband, and a well-paying job. Andrea was content, but it was undeniable that a small part of her yearned for her parents' validation. How many milestones was she going to reach without her parents ever acknowledging any of them? Her next milestone came sooner than she thought. Andrea was pregnant with her first child. She couldn't contain her excitement. As much as she hated how it was expected of her to be a mother to her children and nothing else, Andrea wanted to be a mother. She had been taught how to raise children and knew she would be a good mother. Preparations for the baby began in a whirlwind of plans and emotions as she and her husband Brock started deciding how they would adjust their working lives to accommodate the baby. Andrea didn't want to put her life on a standstill for the baby. She would take time off close to her due date and for the first few months of her child's life, as would her husband. They would both start part-time work afterwards and speak to their firms to adjust their schedules as needed. Nursery walls, clothes, baby-proofing, and doctor's appointments. Andrea was so caught up in the excitement of the new member of their family that she forgot the one she'd been estranged from 7 years ago. That was until she received a friend request from her mother on Facebook. Hesitantly but silently excited, Andrea accepted the request and was further enlivened when she received a message from her. Her parents wanted to meet. Andrea was flooded with mixed emotions. There was exhilaration at the thought of finally seeing her parents again, hesitance because she didn't know what they wanted, and fear because she didn't know how the meeting would go. The date they decided on was fast approaching, and as it drew closer, Andrea's apprehension grew. It had been 7 years. What prompted them to reach out now? She didn't have time to rethink her decision, as the day dawned upon her a lot faster than she expected. She found herself at a cafe in the center of town she had recommended, as her parents were making the trip from the suburbs to the city to meet her. Sipping on her coffee, she looked out the window, waiting for them to arrive. Her worry grew when they didn't show up at the planned time. However, she was suddenly faced with the two people she hadn't seen and constantly thought about for almost a decade of her life. They were finally here. Andrea? Her mother seemed weaker, frailer. It was natural. It had been a while. She also seemed to be unsure of who she was sitting across from, which was natural again. Andrea had grown since she'd last seen her, both emotionally and physically. How have you been? Andrea's heart clenched at the words. They cared. They chatted for a while, Andrea updating her parents on everything that she'd been going through with her job and her husband, and her parents letting her know how her brother's children were doing. It felt bittersweet. Andrea never regretted leaving, but hearing about the lives she was missing wasn't easy. Come back, Andrea. Andrea smiled at her mother's request. It's not that easy, Mom. I still need to work here once the baby grows up enough for me to leave them without me. What? Andrea was taken aback by her father's sudden interjection. He'd barely talked all afternoon. What's wrong? You're going to keep working once your baby is here? Don't they need a mother? The words hit Andrea like a truck. Her parents hadn't changed. We're here to make sure you make the right choices, Andrea. You've strayed enough. It's time you fulfill your role as a mother and forget the distractions that you've consumed yourself with for the last 7 years. Her father added to her mother's words. It's nice that you've been able to enjoy yourself for the last few years, but it's time you collect yourself and do what you know you need to do, Andrea. Your real life is waiting for you. All the hopes Andrea had of rejoining her old family shattered in an instant. Her parents were only here to ensure she left the life she had built for herself to fulfill the life they always dreamed she'd live. The tears were immediate. She had such high expectations for what her life could be from the moment she received her mother's request. Maybe it was her fault for allowing herself to hope so freely. I've worked toward the life I have here, the career I have for so long, Mom and Dad. I can't just abandon it the moment I have a child. Her mother scoffed. You've messed around enough, Andrea. I know we made it difficult for you, but we always did it for your own good. Andrea went silent. You know, I was having a hard time. It's called tough love, Andrea. Do you even feel bad? Andrea was met with silence. She could tell her parents were thinking. They still wanted to bring her back to their home, to have a heavy hand in how her child was brought up. We're sorry, Andrea. We truly are. Just listen to us. We know what's best for you. What are you sorry for, Dad? More silence. Andrea was in disbelief. Mom, Dad, what are you sorry for? We're sorry you felt restricted in the way we brought you up. Her father's words confirmed her suspicions. They felt no remorse. They weren't here to make amends. They just wanted to make sure they got their hands on her child, to make sure the baby didn't make the same mistakes she made. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for how it made me feel. That's not an apology, Dad. Her father laughed incredulously. This is what happens when you people think you can do whatever you want. Stop acting like a child, Andrea. You're an adult now. Her mother chimed in. Your child needs grandparents, Andrea. Why? So you can teach my child to be a bigot if he's a boy and treat her like a slave if she's a girl? I'd rather not, thank you. Brock's parents will be plenty. We said we're sorry, Andrea. You don't mean that, Andrea sniffed, looking her father in the eyes. Do you know how difficult the first few years away from home were for me? My friend's parents helped me take out a loan, but it was up to me to repay it. I was juggling my degree and part-time jobs just to afford basic accommodation and living expenses, all while knowing my brothers lived like kings at college, just because they were born male. Are you even sorry about that? We're sorry about whatever that upset you, Andrea. Her mother couldn't even hide the insincerity in her voice. They were clearly going through the motions to get what they truly wanted. Andrea couldn't believe what was happening. Okay, Mom and Dad, if you are really that sorry, make up for it. How can we do that, Andrea? I spent most of the last 7 years paying off the debt you forced me to amass, starting at 19 years old. Repay me in full. Andrea's parents looked at each other in shock. You can't expect us to do that. I know you can afford it. I've seen your holidays and your gifts. Your sons are treating you like royalty, a luxury they can afford because of your donations to them. They didn't have to spend 5 years paying off debt. The least you could do is the same for me, despite me already having suffered. It wasn't even about the money. Andrea just wanted to see if her parents even vaguely felt bad for what they forced her through. Their silence spoke volumes. Andrea stood up and left, her eyes welling up with tears. They wanted nothing to do with her. They just wanted influence over her child. The days that followed were difficult. Andrea was bombarded with messages and calls from her brothers and parents. They clearly did not expect her to react the way she did. The disbelief and entitlement were evident in all the messages she received, demanding that she explain why she wasn't coming back home. Gray wanted to know why she wanted money when she was earning plenty as an engineer, and her husband was a successful doctor. Andrea knew he'd never understand. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about what the money represented. Andrea and Brock continued preparations for the baby. They were having a girl. The reveal only solidified Andrea's intention to make sure she didn't let her parents near her. As much as Andrea tried to forget her parents and move on, doubts kept plaguing her mind. Her mother's words kept echoing in her head. "Your child needs grandparents, Andrea." As upsetting as some of Andrea's memories of her childhood were, some of the happiest moments of her life came with her family. It wasn't just grandparents Andrea would be depriving her daughter of if she stayed alienated from her family. Family dinners, weddings, and functions were always so full of energy and heart, and Andrea would never forget the joy she got from spending time with her cousins and family. Eating, laughing, talking. Was she ready to say goodbye to all of that? She wasn't lying when she said Brock's parents were enough. He had lovely parents, both of whom were incredibly supportive of Andrea's decision to keep working after the baby had grown up. They even offered to babysit her while Andrea worked. However, Brock was an only child. The baby wouldn't have cousins to grow up with or the familial experience Andrea enjoyed. She shook her head to clear her thoughts. Having a close family wasn't worth having her daughter deprived of the opportunity to chase her dreams. Andrea's due date was fast approaching. She'd taken time off work as she wasn't up to working in her state. Brock was doing everything he could to keep her comfortable. Andrea was grateful. She had no concerns about how things were going to be once the baby came. A few days before Andrea was due, she received a surprise visit from her family. "We're giving you a chance to change your mind." Andrea looked at her father with distaste and infuriation. "I had the chance. I didn't take it, Dad. I don't want it." Andrea's mother scoffed. "Are you seriously throwing away your family for money, Andrea? This is what happens when girls want it all. Your greed is overtaking your ability to think rationally." Andrea was seething. They truly couldn't see what the problem was, could they? To them, she wasn't a 26-year-old adult with a job, an apartment, and a husband. Andrea was still a stubborn, pig-headed little girl, refusing to listen to her mother and father despite them knowing best. "Dad, this isn't about money at all. Even if you give me the money, I would give it all away to charity that would help people without access to education pursue the careers of their dreams. Do you not understand what my problem was? I'm not trying to punish you for not giving me my freedom. I'm trying to make you understand. I've seen pictures of Gray's daughters. Are you going to do the same thing you did to me to them? Refuse to let them explore their interests outside of household chores? Suppress their creativity? Subdue their curiosity? Calling it unnecessary and presumptuous? All I wanted is to know that you understood why I ran away, and to feel sorry for putting me through what you did. I struggled, Mom and Dad." Andrea's voice cracked, but her parents stayed silent, so she continued. "All I wanted from you was to hear that you were proud of me, to hear that you cared about what I'd achieved. Was that really too much to ask for?" Silence followed, and Andrea stared at her parents, willing them to finally accept her pleading. She once again felt like a weak, vulnerable little girl begging her parents for attention and validation. "Okay, Andrea, if this is the life you choose to follow, we can't continue to pretend we're fine with it. We'll leave you to it. If you're smart, you'll come back to us eventually." Her parents walked out of the house, leaving Andrea alone with her thoughts. Contrary to what she felt after she had laid her soul out to her parents, Andrea now felt strangely calm and content. "If you're smart," her father had said before he left. She was smart. She was capable. She knew what she was doing, and she was going to be okay. She didn't need her parents. And her baby didn't need her parents either. She'd made it so far without them. And just as she did, her baby would thrive. The morning Andrea went into labor was chaotic, but Brock had it all under control. Andrea was rushed to the hospital and checked into the maternity ward, and the birth was free of complications. Andrea's baby was here, and she was beautiful. Brock and Andrea gazed at their baby in wonder and silent awe. Andrea looked up at Brock, tears in her eyes. "Libera, is that what you want to name her?" Andrea nodded. "A girl of liberty, free to do whatever her heart desires." Brock smiled and held Andrea's hand. "I love it."